if you are ever in a catastrophic car crash or really any sudden life-threatening situation, your brain is going to deliberately sabotage your memory.
Oh, completely. It's an instant override.
Right. It will shut down your logic centers, it'll flood your bloodstream with just a massive dose of cortisol, and it intentionally fragments your memory of the event into these tiny, disjointed sensory loops.
Which feels like a glitch, but it's totally by design.
Exactly. It does all of this biological sabotage for one singular reason, and that is to save your life in that exact microsecond. But I want you to imagine if that exact biological response wasn't a rare, terrifying accident.
Like if it wasn't just a one-off emergency.
Yeah, imagine if that extreme lethal stress was just your Tuesday, if it was your daily reality, your baseline existence. How exactly does a human brain and body adapt to survive that without just, completely burning out?
It's a staggering premise to think about, really, because human beings are built to experience stress as an anomaly,
Yeah.
a spike in the data.
Right, like a momentary panic.
Exactly. We have this intricate nervous system designed to handle, say, a sudden predator or a falling branch. But we aren't designed to live in the red zone permanently. When you force a human mind to live in a perpetual state of mortal threat, the adaptations it makes are, well, they're both miraculous and incredibly dark.
And that biological tightrope is the mission of our deep dive today. We are exploring the warrior's mind.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. To do this, we've pulled together a massive stack of research dossiers covering real-world psychology, neurobiology, and existential philosophy.
Heavy stuff.
Very heavy. But to actually make sense of all this dense science, to see it in action, we're going to use the fictional sci-fi and fantasy world of the book San Vitae, The Awakening, as our central case study.
Which is, it is just the perfect backdrop for this kind of exploration. To set the stage for you, the world of San Vitae is a brutal, dystopian society ruled by this immortal, entirely empathy-devoid council known as the Santerrie.
They are terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. And they are a textbook example of what sociologists call the architecture of oppression.
Right, because it's not just physical violence.
Exactly. They don't just maintain control by pointing weapons at people. They maintain it through systemic isolation, by controlling the cultural narratives and enforcing ritualized inequality. They want their subjects fragmented and terrified.
And navigating this absolute nightmare is our protagonist, Kurien. He's what's known in this universe as a San Vitae, which means he's a being capable of manifesting incredible physical and energy-based abilities.
Yeah, he's incredibly powerful.
But we are deliberately not looking at his journey today as just, a fun, action-packed sci-fi adventure. We are treating Kurien as a clinical and philosophical case study.
Because there is so much real-world science embedded in his character arc.
Exactly. We want to know what chronic combat, deep trauma, and the sheer will to survive actually due to the neurobiology of the human mind.
Because when we watch Kurien fight and survive the Santerrie, we aren't just looking at natural reflexes or genetic luck. These combat instincts are deliberately, relentlessly conditioned.
They are beaten into him almost.
Yeah, literally in some cases. When danger strikes, his mind executes a highly specific psychological framework. In the real world, military psychologists and neuroscientists actually call this stress inoculation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Stress inoculation. So it's essentially vaccinating the brain against panic.
That's a great way to phrase it, yeah.
But how does that actually work at a cellular level? Does your brain just, stop feeling fear entirely?
Not at all. The fear is still there. But in our world, this is used by elite special forces and first responders to change the brain's relationship to that fear.
Oh, interesting. So the fear is just repurposed.
Sort of. The mechanism relies on the nervous system's adaptability. By repeatedly exposing the brain and body to highly controlled, intense stress simulations, you force the nervous system to adapt. Over time, you build up neural pathways that reduce cognitive shutdown.
I see.
You literally train the nervous system to stop treating a sudden threat as an overwhelming apocalyptic catastrophe and instead start treating it as a solvable mechanical problem.
I love that. It's like a fire drill. If you run a fire drill 100 times, when there's an actual fire, you don't panic. Your body just takes over.
Precisely. Muscle memory kicks in.
But there's a massive difference between a soldier in a controlled training facility and what Kurien goes through, right? For a warrior like him, the fire drill involves actual flames.
Oh, completely.
His inoculation isn't happening in a safe environment where someone can just blow a whistle and stop the simulation. He lives under the Santerrie's thumb. So his inoculation is forged through deliberate, brutal conditioning combined with actual daily trauma.
Which is a brutal combination.
And according to the Dossier, this triggers something called the protector archetype.
Yes, and that's a crucial distinction. The protector archetype emerges when a person's entire psychological identity fuses with the duty to safeguard others.
Usually because of early trauma, right?
Exactly. Usually because they were exposed to intense violence early in life.
Yeah.
The biological result of this is chronic hypervigilance. Kurien's brain is literally rewiring its threat detection networks.
So he can never really relax.
Never. He is in a permanent, exhausting state of scanning his environment for danger, ensuring that he is always the human shield for the people he loves.
There's a scene early in the book that grounds this perfectly. Kurien is training with his mentor, Master Gosseth.
Oh, the mountain scene.
Yes. And they aren't in some comfortable, padded dojo. They are out in the freezing dark, totally alone on a snow-covered mountainside. Gosseth isn't just teaching him how to throw a punch or block a strike.
Right, it's way beyond physical technique.
It's this grueling mental conditioning designed to force Kurien's brain to operate despite severe physical exhaustion, sensory deprivation, and environmental pain.
It's a process of forcing the brain's survival hardware to boot up and run complex software while under extreme duress.
But, training is one thing. What happens when the actual missiles start flying? Because there's a biological tax for maintaining that kind of readiness.
A massive tax, yeah.
Yep. When the real fight starts, the physical brain has to execute these actions under fire without simply short-circuiting. And that comes down to a very delicate chemical cocktail flooding the system.
It does. It's primarily the balance of adrenaline and cortisol. In a high-threat scenario, your adrenal glands dump adrenaline into your bloodstream.
The classic fight or flight response.
Exactly. This is designed to sharpen focus and reaction time instantly. It literally changes your physiology. Your pupils dilate to let in more light, which creates this tunnel vision effect. Blood is shunted away from your digestive tract and pushed into your major muscle groups.
Getting ready to run or hit something.
Right. Meanwhile, cortisol is released to maintain sustained readiness over a longer period. It keeps the engine running hot by keeping blood glucose levels high.
Okay, wait. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because everything I've ever read about a massive dump of adrenaline says it actually ruins your fine motor skills.
That is usually true, yes.
Right. It gives you the shakes, it makes you clumsy, and it causes people to panic and flail. So if someone like Kurien or, an elite tier 1 operator in the real world is completely flooded with those exact same chemicals, how are they executing perfect millimeter-precise combat moves instead of just scrambling blindly?
What's fascinating here is the exact paradox of the warrior's mind. And it brings us to a phenomenon known as amygdala prefrontal coordination.
Okay, break that down for us.
Let's look at the anatomy. The amygdala is your brain's fear center. It is the primitive alarm bell screaming that you are about to die.
The panic button.
Exactly. In a normal person, when that alarm is blaring at full volume, it completely shuts down the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the evolutionary newer part of the brain sitting right behind your forehead. It's responsible for logic, reasoning, and complex decision-making.
So if I can use an analogy here, if the amygdala is a blazing fire alarm, the prefrontal cortex is the fire chief.
I like where this is going.
In a normal, untrained brain, when that alarm is absolutely deafening, the fire chief panics, evacuates the building, and all logic just shuts down. The animal brain takes over.
Yes, exactly.
What you're saying is, through that brutal stress inoculation on the snowy mountain, Kurien has trained his fire chief to put in earplugs, stay in the burning room, and continue reading the structural blueprints.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. Elite fighters physically train their neural pathways to keep the prefrontal cortex online and functioning, even when the amygdala is fully activated and screaming for them to run.
That sounds almost impossible.
It takes immense conditioning. They maintain executive control over their own panic. And when you achieve this, you enter what sports psychologists and neuroscientists call the flow state under threat.
Oh, wow.
Time physically seems to dilate and slow down. Self-consciousness completely vanishes. Your actions become purely instinctive, driven by deeply ingrained muscle memory and procedural learning rather than conscious thought.
There is a quote from Kurien reflecting on this exact state that just gave me chills. He says, "In the moment of the strike, there is no fear, only clarity."
which perfectly describes that prefrontal control.
And we see this play out in an incredibly tense scene. He's navigating a tunnel, and a misguided missile implodes the stone structure right in front of him.
A completely unpredictable, catastrophic event.
Right. A normal person would freeze in shock or dive blindly in the wrong direction. But Kurien doesn't. His prefrontal cortex stays online. He instantly dives away from the collapsing stone, calculating physical survival trajectories in a fraction of a second without a single ounce of emotional paralysis.
And we also see the physical manifestation of that chemical cocktail you mentioned earlier. After an energy wave blast later in the story, Kurien describes feeling a literal buzzing sensation beneath his skin.
Yes, that's the adrenaline and cortisol still flooding his system, right? The engine is still running incredibly hot, but he has it completely harnessed.
He is operating as a perfectly optimized survival machine. But, and this is a big but, there is always a biological tax for keeping the prefrontal cortex online during a raging adrenaline dump.
You can't just stay in that state forever.
No, the human brain cannot sustain that level of hyperarousal indefinitely. When the battle ends, all that suppressed cortisol and all the contained fear doesn't just vanish into thin air. It has to go somewhere.
So it turns inward.
Exactly. And that brings us to the psychological fracturing that occurs in the aftermath.
Right, because what happens when he is pushed past his biological limits? In psychology, I know there's a concept called shadow integration, which is about confronting the repressed, sometimes destructive traits within ourselves.
Which we all have to some degree.
Sure, but what Kurien experiences goes way beyond just having a dark side.
It does. In cases of severe, chronic, life-threatening trauma, the mind often goes a step further into trauma-induced identity splitting.
It literally breaks apart.
Yes. The constant danger conditions the brain to default to extreme violence, just to stay alive. But violence is corrosive to the human psyche. So to protect the core compassionate identity, the mind psychologically fractures. It creates a hyper-violent protector self that can shoulder the moral and physical burden of killing.
Wow.
In the lore of Vitae, this psychological phenomenon is brilliantly externalized as Kurien's demon aspect.
Lotus.
Yes.
It's the neurobiology of a dissociative rage episode weaponized. The conscious mind essentially steps aside because the physical and emotional threat is simply too overwhelming, and this monster takes the wheel.
Survival at all costs.
And we see this exact fracture during one of the most brutal, visceral combat scenes in the entire text. Kurien's physical body is fundamentally broken. He has been literally cratered into solid stone by an enemy.
It's a devastating scene to read.
It really is. He has broken ribs, a shattered collarbone, his internal organs are hemorrhaging. By all biological metrics, he should be dead, or at least completely paralyzed by the pain.
But his survival instinct, that shadow, refuses to let the organism die. The mandate to protect is too strong.
His demon aspect, Lotus, fully takes over his consciousness, and Lotus bypasses Kurien's physical pain entirely. She uses his shattered body to perform this devastating reality-bending maneuver called a blink step.
Moving so fast it defies physics.
Exactly. She creates a vacuum tornado of leaves. And the whole time this is happening, the demon is literally whispering in his mind, telling him to tap into fear, hate, pain, desire. It's terrifying to read.
It's the shadow self fully unleashed.
And it made me wonder, if you have to disassociate to that extreme degree, if you have to let a literal monster take control just to survive the day, aren't you essentially losing the very humanity you were trying to protect in the first place?
That is perhaps the most tragic reality of the warrior's mind. The brain is an evolutionary organ, and it will always prioritize biological survival over identity preservation.
It doesn't care about your morals, it just wants you breathing.
Exactly. It will gladly shatter your sense of self, your morality, and your personality if it means your physical body lives to see tomorrow. And this biological prioritization extends deeply into how memory itself functions, which becomes its own kind of prison.
How so? Like the fragmented memories we talked about at the very beginning with the car crash example.
Precisely. Under normal circumstances, an area of your brain called the hippocampus acts as a librarian. It organizes your memories chronologically, attaching a beginning, middle, and end, turning experiences into a coherent story.
Filing them away nicely.
Right. But during extreme trauma, the brain gets flooded with glucocorticoids, which are actually toxic to the hippocampus at high levels. So the brain protects the hippocampus by taking it entirely offline.
Oh, wow. Leaving the amygdala to do the recording.
Yes. But the amygdala doesn't store chronological stories. It stores untimestamped sensory fragments, raw emotions, and intense physical sensations.
So it's just raw data.
Exactly. That is why Kurien's trauma memories don't return as coherent narratives,
Mm.
where he can say, oh, this bad thing happened in the past and now it is over. They return as sensory-driven flashbacks.
Right, like the smell of blood.
The smell of blood, the sound of collapsing stone, the looping sensation of panic. Because they have no timestamp, the brain processes them as if the trauma is happening right now, again and again.
That is a devastating biological toll. You are trapped in a body that feels like it's constantly under attack, even if you're just sitting in a quiet room.
It's exhausting.
Which honestly begs the question, if the psychological and physical costs of fighting are this high, what actually keeps a warrior going? If your identity is fracturing and your memories are a sensory minefield, why not just lay down and give up?
That transition from the biological how to the philosophical why is where we see the true resilience of the human spirit.
Right.
And it roots deeply into existential warrior philosophy and the Stoic ethos.
Okay, so bringing in some philosophy.
Yes. A true warrior, someone who survives this kind of systemic oppression, has to internalize a fundamental truth. You can only control your own actions, not the outcomes.
Right. The universe is complete chaos. The Santerrie are infinitely more powerful, but your response to that chaos is the only thing you actually own.
Yes. Meaning isn't found in peace or safety, because those things don't exist for Kurien. Meaning is actively created through the choices he makes in the face of that chaos.
That makes a lot of sense.
But in the specific context of Vitae, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the environment. The Santerrie exert total authoritarian control. They regulate isolation, they punish empathy, and they systemically destroy trust.
Because disconnected people are easier to rule.
Exactly. So in that specific environment, we see another profound philosophical anchor emerge for Kurien.
Love as a political act. Love as rebellion.
Exactly. Under systemic oppression, intimate emotional connection is not just a romance trope. The Santerrie maintain their power by ensuring everyone is emotionally hollow, suspicious, and fragmented.
So to feel anything is basically defying them.
Yes. By actively choosing to love, by being vulnerable, Kurien is restoring the personal agency that the trauma and his oppressors attempted to steal from him.
It is the emotional core of his entire survival strategy. His bond with Myasuchi early on, and later his incredibly deep connection with Sharina, completely defies the Santerrie's programming.
It's beautiful to read.
It really is. There is this incredibly powerful, quiet moment in the book where Kurien and Sharina are together. They just have their palms pressed against each other, but they are so attuned that they can feel their pulses beating in perfect unison.
That's a huge shift for his nervous system.
Right. It's a moment of pure, unguarded vulnerability for a character whose brain is wired to constantly scan for threats. And Kurien makes this defiant vow to her. He says, if loving you is treason, then I will burn for it.
It is an existential refusal to be reduced to a weapon. That connection is the philosophical anchor that keeps his shadow self, the Lotus demon, in check.
It grounds him.
It grounds his prefrontal cortex. It proves that devotion can be a deeply moral anchoring force when it is used to protect the vulnerable and resist cruelty.
But every war eventually ends, or at least shifts. We have to look at the inevitable culmination of this journey. Once the combat mindset has done its job, once the monster has ensured survival and the oppressor is fought off, how does a warrior actually turn off the war?
That's the million-dollar question.
How do you go from surviving, which is all your brain knows how to do, to actually living?
That is arguably the hardest battle of all. In psychology, we look at healing in the aftermath. You will often hear people use the term post-traumatic growth, which unfortunately suggests a sort of simple positive change.
Like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Right, like you went through something hard and came out stronger and happier. But for the level of trauma we are discussing with Kurien and Sharina, the much more accurate and difficult framework is post-traumatic integration.
Okay, so what does this all mean? Does integration mean you don't just sweep the trauma under the rug and try to go back to normal?
You cannot go back to normal. Post-traumatic integration requires weaving the trauma, the violence, and the shadow self into a completely new, coherent, empowered identity.
You have to embrace it all.
You cannot erase the past. You have to accept it, reconcile with the monster you had to become to survive, and integrate those dark parts into your daily life without letting them control you.
Because the goal for someone like Kurien or Sharina isn't to go back to who they were before the trauma. That person is gone.
Completely gone.
The innocent version of them that existed before the Santerrie, before the violence, before the bone-shattering fights, That version of them is dead.
And deeply grieving that past self is a mandatory part of the process. The objective is not restoration. It is consciously designing a future self.
How do you even begin to do that?
Healing from this requires leveraging the brain's neuroplasticity, its remarkable ability to literally rewire its own synaptic pathways. But that rewiring doesn't happen on its own. It has to be driven by purpose.
How does purpose actually rewire the brain?
Well, when you engage in meaningful, purposeful action like building a new community or protecting someone out of love rather than fear, your brain releases dopamine.
Reward chemical.
Right. Dopamine acts as a neurochemical bonding agent. It physically reinforces new synaptic pathways. There's a rule in neuroscience called Hebb's law neurons that fire together, wire together.
Oh, I've heard that.
As you repeatedly choose connection over fear, those new pathways become stronger than the old threat-scanning pathways built by the Santerrie. Slowly, the trauma memories shift from being reactive, sensory triggers in the amygdala, to reflective experiences managed by the prefrontal cortex.
They become the authors of their own lives again, rather than just reacting to the villains. There are two quotes from the text that perfectly encapsulate this final stage. First, there's Sharina's profound realization after the immediate danger has passed. She looks at the devastation and says, "We survived the ruin. Now we must learn how to live."
Such a powerful moment.
And then we have Kurien's ultimate transcendence of his own programming. He realizes, my pain shaped me, but it does not define who I will become.
That realization is the absolute pinnacle of the existential journey. It is the highest act of human will. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche argued that the ultimate achievement is to shape oneself, to become the artist of your own life.
And that's what Kurien is doing.
Exactly. He is forging an authentic, self-directed identity entirely from the ashes of his survival. He is no longer a reactionary weapon against the Santerrie. He's choosing his own existence.
It's an incredible transformation to witness, and it brings us to why this matters for you, listening right now. You might not be dodging literal missiles in collapsed stone tunnels.
Probably not.
Right, you might not be fighting an immortal council of dystopian overlords or dealing with a literal demon aspect trying to take over your central nervous system. But the neurobiology of how your brain processes a high-stakes meeting, a sudden loss, or a terrifying near miss in your car is exactly the same.
The hardware is identical.
How you find flow under pressure, how your memory fragments under extreme duress, and how you construct profound meaning from your own pain. That is exactly the same as Kurien's journey. Your brain is wired with the exact same incredible adaptive machinery.
Which leaves us with a fascinating and perhaps deeply unsettling final thought.
Lay it on us.
We've spent this entire time detailing how a warrior's brain physically and chemically rewires itself to function perfectly within chaos, threat, and trauma. It adapts to the red zone. So, what happens when someone like that finally achieves the peace they fought so hard for? When your mind has been custom built for war, does true peace suddenly feel like a terrifying new kind of danger?
Something for you to mull over until next time.